Broadcasting live from Lothal. Good morning, Lothal. It's the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Good Morning Lothal, the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast. I'm Pete Salas, along with
Rolando Zamora.
How we doing, Rolly?
I'm good, man. I see you have your Batman shirt today. Pay a little bit of tribute to Kevin Conroy.
Yes.
I like that.
Thank you. So I guess we'll get right to it right at the top, since it's not exactly Star Wars related. We did lose a huge name in the geekdom, fandom world, whatever you want to call it. Just an overall great guy. I can attest to that firsthand. After meeting him, spending some time with him, we lost Mr. Kevin Conroy. Brilliant voice actor, obviously most well known as the voice of Batman, in just about any animated video game, whatnot, anything Batman that you've ever heard him in a cartoon version, it has probably been Mr. Kevin Conroy. He passed away this past week, so thank you, Rolly, for bringing that up. And I just wanted to pay some tribute to him, because you know that we love and appreciate voice actors here on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now that that's out of the way, a little bit more house cleaning. Want to please ask everybody at the top of the show to like, share, subscribe, and rate. We really appreciate it, and it helps us out tremendously. Today's episode of Rebels is Season 2, Episode 13. It's called The Protector of Concord Dawn. But before we get to that, Rolly, what's happening around the galaxy?
Let's see what's happening this week in Star Wars.
So this week in Star Wars, to lead off, we actually had a surprise cartoon drop that I was completely caught off guard by. I haven't seen it, but nonetheless, I found it very interesting. This dropped on November 12th. It is, Pete, you might like this one. It's about Grogu, our friend from The Mandalorian. And apparently this is called Zen Grogu and Dust Bunnies. And it's on Disney Plus, again, as of November 12th. And just to give you guys a brief synopsis on that, it is a short film hand-drawn by Studio Ghibli, which I'm not too familiar with. I'm sure maybe, Pete, you are.
No, actually, I am not personally. I know who Studio Ghibli is. They made like Totoro and a bunch of other kind of animes that have a very different, like, it's almost like a calming Zen kind of a anime style drawing. It's not like all like hyped out like Dragon Ball Z or some of the other ones, but my sister's a big fan of it. But I would be lying if I said I'm a big fan of it. I've watched maybe one. I'm all the way not a huge fan of anime altogether. I think we mentioned that a couple episodes back, but I am aware of Studio Ghibli, and that's really cool that they had like a partnership with Star Wars.
Yeah, so I mean, just by you saying that Totoro, that's already way more than I know. But just again, to give you guys a brief synopsis, it stars Grogu, who we all know from The Mandalorian, and the Susu Watari, which I guess are apparently the Dust Bunnies in reference in the title. Okay. And that creature, I suppose, is from the animated films My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away, which are apparently famous animes drawn by Studio Ghibli.
Yes, they are. I know the names. Like I said, my sister's a fan, but I don't know it. But I might give this a shot, because all-around fan of Grogu, that's for sure.
Speaking of which, since we're getting closer to the holidays, did you see that? I don't know if it's real or somebody invented it themselves. There's a Grogu like tree topper, where he's kind of climbing the tree and he's like reaching out to like an ornament ball. Oh,
I did see that picture. Yes. Now, that is pretty cute.
Yeah, I started sharing that with some of my friends. I was like, here's a suggestion for your tree toppers this year.
Because angels are boring and Santa Claus passe. Let's put Grogu up there, obviously.
And speaking of the holidays, the next bit of news we have this week in Star Wars is the first 2 episodes of Andor are set to air on ABC, FX, Freeform, and Hulu over the Thanksgiving break.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I found it interesting. As far as Disney or Star Wars, what have you, I've never heard them do anything like this before. And I was curious as to why they're doing it. Do you have any input on that?
The only thing I can think of is that I think it's a nice crossover, because obviously ABC is, under that Disney umbrella, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I think, okay. So there's some nice crossover there as far as getting people on a network to maybe follow a streaming platform that, those worlds don't usually cross over very often. And I think that it's just kind of like maybe Disney is putting some backing into this, and like the traction on the show was only real fans were like, wow, this is an amazing show, like we've been doing every week. But a lot of fans were kind of like, down on it. It's a little slow or whatnot. And I think that belief system trickled down without people actually giving it a shot. So if you do it this way, you already have ABC on your TV for free, then basically you're watching it. It's a free preview for the non-streaming people to hopefully jump on board with the streaming platform, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't know what to think of it too much. I was like, is this a bad thing or a good thing? Because what we know of Andor, I mean, you can't say enough great things, right? But I've talked to friends and people and just told them, like, it's kind of sad that I know that there are people, number one, that aren't Star Wars fans that are not watching this. This has to be the best show on TV, period, this year. And then even fans within the Star Wars universe, there are people that are not watching this show. So when I saw this, I was like, if this is a means to reach out to all these people to basically tell them you guys are really missing out on a great show if you're not watching this, then I'm all for it. So it's kind of hard for me to look negative on this.
Right. That's exactly, I think everything that we've said has a little bit to do with this decision.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, interesting that like ABC is a no-brainer because it's kind of part of the Disney family. FX, I guess, is maybe owned by ABC, and I didn't realize that. Freeform, not too familiar with it. I know I have it downloaded on my Roku, but I don't ever really click it. The one that was surprising was Hulu. That surprised me that. Although I guess now that I think about it, not really, because Hulu is mainly... They have
that package with Disney Plus where you can bundle them. And I think the FX thing, maybe I'm overstepping here, but since they bought 20th Century Fox, maybe there's some attachment to that, because I know FX is a Fox product, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, anything to get the word out and to possibly attract new fans and Star Wars fans that... I don't know very many Star Wars fans who don't subscribe to Disney Plus. If you're a Star Wars fan, why wouldn't you? But there's much smarter people than us that have made these decisions, I guess, as far as marketing goes. And it's talking from a guy in marketing, so it makes sense to me. It's some nice crossover. The word synergy is real big. It's a real hot word amongst marketing people these days. So yeah, that's probably has everything to do with it.
Yeah, and just to give you guys a more concrete description of when these episodes are airing, on ABC, they're set to air November 23rd at 9 Eastern. FX the next day, November 24th at 9 Eastern. Oh, I suppose this is PM. I didn't even write that down, but I'm pretty sure it's
I would
PM.
assume so, yeah.
Yeah, Freeform the next day, November 25th, 9 p.m. Eastern. And Hulu will be streaming at any time between November 23rd and December 7th. So if you guys are not watching Andor, this is a great opportunity for you guys to step into that universe, because it cannot miss TV for the year.
Right.
And on that note, let's jump right into Andor.
Okay, let's do it. Man, this last episode, it was a gut wrencher. It was a gut punch.
Yeah, the only thing I could say, I was just thinking about this all weekend in several group texts. I was thinking to just shout, "He can't swim, you guys! He can't swim!"
I know, yeah, he can't swim with the crying emoji. That's all.
Exactly.
That's all I've seen everywhere.
I think of that line from My Girl where she's like, "He can't see without his glasses."
Oh yeah. Oh, that's another heartbreak, Rolly. My God. Wow. That one's a deep cut. Yeah. So of course we're talking about Andor. This was episode 10 and it was called One Way Out. And the first note on here is obviously what we're talking about. He can't swim. Rolly, would you like to give us a little backstory on what exactly that means for those that are not in the loop?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you guys know, we've been discussing Andy Serkis's appearance in Andor playing a character called Kino. And Kino is basically the head prisoner, so to say, on Andor's floor of this Narkina 5 prison. Well, as we talked about in the last episode, Kino is the prisoner who's all about just keep your head down, do your work, do your time, and we'll all get out of here. Well,
Right.
at the end of last episode, we come to find out nobody's getting out of there. So Kino basically gets on board with helping Andor get out. At least we thought so. And when this episode starts, we start seeing them really planning to finally get out. And there's still some kind of resistance from Kino. And I wasn't sure why. And then sure enough, we do find out later. But basically, before we get to that, Andor convinces Kino that he has to take the lead on this. He is the voice for all the prisoners on that floor, and potentially all the other floors they're going to reach out to. So there's a specific scene where they finally do create an uprising. They get to the control center where this voice that they hear throughout the prison, those are where the commands are ordered from. They manage to take control of it, and Kino gives a very motivating speech where he basically tells the prisoners, there's only one way out, which is the title of this episode. We have to work together to get out of here, and such. But even in that speech, if you remember, Pete, Andor kind of tells him something like, "That's it. That's all you got."
Yeah.
And again, I think it was just to address the hesitancy of what Kino is going through. So Kino does overcome it, and when the prisoners break out, when they finally get to the exit, you realize that, the prisoners realize that they're surrounded by water, so they have to basically swim. It's like they're on Alcatraz, basically. If they're not going to die in the prison, they're going to die in the current. And when they get to the end, of course, it feels so liberating, like our heroes are escaping, only to find out that Kino looks at Andor and says, "I can't swim." And Andor, and Andor looks at him like, what do you mean? And there's this brief moment where you think like Andor's going to be able to step in and say, "It's, I got you. We'll figure this out together."
Yeah.
But the rush of prisoners actually pushes Cassian over the ledge. So Cassian never gets the opportunity to help Kino. And it's just, ultimately Kino's fate is he's stuck there forever. And it's gut-wrenching, it's heartbreaking, but it's also very enlightening, because if you remember, Pete, Andy Serkis's character Kino has this look on his face in the previous episode when the doctor's telling him that nobody's getting out. Mm-hmm. After I went back and thought about it, he has this look on his face because he realizes then and there he's dead. Kino knows what's at the end of the tunnel if they break out, and it's his fate. The fact that he can't swim, he's dead on the spot as soon as they realized that nobody was going to get out. So one way or the other, he was going to die there in the prison. And once they get to the end, you also go back and reflect on those scenes where he's resistant to Cassian to continuing to help, even though at this point he knows nobody's getting out. And now you know the reason why, because he himself is dead. He cannot swim. There's no happy ending for him. So it just makes the scene incredibly more sad than what it was.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think of it in those terms. I guess I didn't. He probably had an idea that there was going to be some form of swimming involved, that maybe he could make it. But I think once he got to the edge, because for a minute there, it seemed like he was like gung-ho to just follow Cassian out the door. But once you got there, like, you're missing a key component, which is not just surrounded by water. There was like a 200-foot drop or something like that all the way to the bottom.
Yes, that too.
So that would have added a little bit of hesitation to like, okay, maybe I can't do it. But yeah, man, that was quite heartbreaking. And the fact that there was like 2 episodes of not so much friendship, but like camaraderie building between Cassian and Kino. So at the very least, like even in moments like this in other Hollywood properties and other movies, TV shows, where we know that like these 2 characters are not going to probably see each other again, at the very least, we get given this like moment of relief of where they get to say goodbye, that kind of thing. Even in, albeit brief, but not in Andor. In Andor, we throw the rule book out the window, and it's like, no, you thought that these 2 built a rapport, these 2 built a bond, a brotherhood, and they're finally going to get to say their goodbye moment, even if it's just like a handshake and a turn around and jump off or whatever. Nope. Like that, it's over. It's just done. We get given this big ball of heartbreak, and then we just get taken right out of the scene, just like that. It's like, wow, man, just another one of those examples of how this show does not follow any of the traditional tropes. So that was another, man, hell of a scene.
Yeah, and to top it off, I remember when that scene happened, I checked how much time was left, and there was like 15 minutes. And I was like, 15 minutes? Like, what could possibly lead that scene? And I just assumed, it's just going to be a transitional scene into to set up the next episode. Boy, was I wrong, because the scene that followed, arguably, a keyword arguably, might have topped the entire prison scene.
Yep.
And basically, what happens is we get this revelation that Lonnie, who is one of the ISB agents, in the same room, we see him talking a lot when Dedra and the rest of the ISB agents gather. We find out that Lonnie is actually a double agent. He is in contact with Lothal. He's been feeding Lothal information for years. And the scene that we get is that Lonnie requests a conversation in person with Lothal, who he has never met. Lothal agrees to meet with him, and basically Lonnie's meeting with him because he wants out. He just had a son, I believe, and he just wants to get out of, not just from Luthen's job basically, but also from the Empire. He wants to leave both of them behind. And the speech that Lothal proceeds to get from him is probably going to go down, in my opinion, as the most iconic speech with regards to rebellion in the Star Wars timeline. Lonnie proceeds to tell him, or ask him rather, I've sacrificed all this. What have you sacrificed? And as soon as he says, what have you sacrificed? I just knew Lothal was going to let him have it.
And I don't, before we get to that part, just, dude, I don't know if there was any other actor other than Stellan Skarsgård who could have taken this line and just emoted such pain and fury and just total lack of everything that remains as part of a human soul could have, because he just put it all out there and he answered the question, what have I sacrificed? And it's like, this was one hell of a speech. So
so it's so good, you guys. I transcribed it. I want to read it to you guys word for word. So Lothal responds, calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight. They've set me on a path from which there is no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost. And by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemies to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. No, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror, or an audience, or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything. I think I've rewatched that clip like countless times between Wednesday and today, Monday that we're recording. It's just so good.
If he's not given a nomination for an Emmy for this role, that's a tragedy right there.
Yeah, I cannot say it enough. I think this episode particularly finally made me say for the first time, this is the best show on TV period this year, in or out of the Star Wars universe. I'm very strong on that stance. I don't think it's gonna change. It's that good, you guys. So
I don't think we can top anything else. There were other things that happened in this episode, but nothing, it all pales in comparison to those two key scenes, which was Kino and Andor's final look at each other and this speech to end the episode. It was a hell of an episode, man. That's all I can say. And I cannot wait for the last two. Okay, so if that puts a button on Andor for this week, let's move into Star Wars Rebels. So Rolly, why don't you hit us with a synopsis?
So looking to secure a new hyperspace route to Lothal, the Rebels head to the Mandalorian-controlled CONCORD Dawn to negotiate safe passage for their fleet. The warrior protectors of the system prove to be less than welcoming, however, and it's up to Kanan and Sabine to turn this group into friends or enemies.
Friends or enemies, exactly. This episode starts with the Ghost rendezvousing with the Phoenix Squadron, and Kanan and the rest of the crew meeting up with the Commander Sato. And there's a little dialogue back and forth. Kanan says, "We got the supplies, but we were fortunate to get away. The Empire's making our travels around the Outer Rim tougher all the time." And Sato says, "Yes, we'll need a new hyperspace route in and out of the Lothal sector." Sabine says, "I may have a perfect shortcut. The system of CONCORD Dawn. It's a Mandalorian colony and not an Imperial territory yet." And Ezra says, "Why not? They've grabbed up just about every other place." And Rex says, "CONCORD Dawn is known for its elite warriors. They were brought in to train clones back in the war, but even the Empire thinks twice about a fight with them." So Sato says, "The question is, who are they loyal to? The Empire does occupy their homeworld of Mandalore, so Imperial influence could be a factor." And Sabine says, "Years before the Clone Wars broke out, the Mandalorians were already at war with each other. This group call themselves the Protectors. They like to make up their own rules." Hera says, "Sounds familiar." And Sato says, "So we go in with strength, scout the system for defenses, and see what we're up against." And Kanan says, "Or why not try diplomacy? Ask permission to use their system as a shortcut." And Sato says, "Diplomacy? Warriors like these only understand strength." And Sabine says, "He's got a point." Hera says, "But we shouldn't make an enemy if we don't need to. If we get permission to fly through their space, the next step could be recruitment to grow the rebellion. We need friends like these Mandalorians. We could have our route and a powerful ally as well." And Sato says, "Very well, Captain Syndulla, the mission is yours." And Sabine says, okay if I tag along." And Hera says, "I was hoping you'd ask." And Ezra says, "Looks like diplomacy won the day for once." And Kanan says, "There was a time when it always won the day. Take it from there."
So after the rebels make that plan, Hera, Sabine, and the pilots from the Phoenix Squadron approach CONCORD Dawn, but they're immediately intercepted by the Protectors that the team was just discussing. And immediately one of them goes on comms talking to Hera and says, "Attention, unregistered ships. This is Fen Rao, Protector of CONCORD Dawn. You are trespassing. Identify yourselves." And Hera responds, "We come in peace, Protector." Fen Rao says, "Peace? That's not a word I hear often. State your mission." Hera says, "We request safe passage through your system." And Fen says, "Well, that depends. Who is asking?" And Hera responds, "Those who would stand with CONCORD Dawn against the Empire." And Fen responds and says, "So you're the rebels I've heard about. How unfortunate for you." Hera says, "You haven't heard what we have to say." And Fen says, "I don't need to. Out here, I act in the name of the Empire." So sure enough, even though Sabine said that they have no affiliation with the Empire has made its reach to CONCORD Dawn. And they're kind of, for all intensive purposes, flying right into a trap. One that wasn't meant to be a trap, but a trap nonetheless. So what happens after that is Fen Rao and the Protectors begin engaging against the Phoenix Squadron, even shooting down some of the pilots. And the Phoenix Squadron's only able to escape the Phoenix Squadron's only escape is that they have to jump to hyperspace, but they're not able to without being shot down. They have to basically stop the ship, punch the coordinates, and jump. But these Mandalorian pilots are so good, they're not going to get the opportunity to do so. So Hera realizes this, and she decides the only way that my team's going to escape is I basically have to jump in between the Mandalorians and them and provide cover. So a few of the Phoenix Squadron members do manage to get away, and Sabine, of course, who is hanging on for Hera has to tell her, "Go, like, you make the jump, I'll be right behind you." Sabine's kind of reluctant to do so, but ultimately she does because Hera is the captain, so she has to take her orders. Mm-hmm. And she makes the jump, and immediately once she makes that jump, we see Hera's A-Wing basically get shot down and borderline destroyed while the rest of the team escapes. So there's a brief moment there before the scene cuts to the next one where we're led to believe, either Hera's gone or she's going to get captured. So the next scene, we see Sabine arrive back at the Phoenix Squadron, and she proceeds to explain to Kanan that Hera was right behind her after Kanan starts asking, where is Hera? And she also tells Kanan that they didn't have a chance as the Protectors work for the Empire also. After she says that, Hera's A-Wing does manage to show up through hyperspace, but it arrives like completely destroyed, just floating freely through space. And Sabine looks over to the cockpit of the damaged ship, and she sees Hera just completely unconscious. So right away she begins to panic and informs Kanan and the Phoenix Squadron that they need to send help immediately. So fortunately, Hera is recovered from her ship and she's taken to the medical bay as soon as possible. The medical droid informs the team that Hera is stable and will eventually recover. However, Sabine's still very distraught over leaving Hera behind, so she begins to apologize to Kanan, and Kanan basically tells her, hey, there was nothing different that you could have done. And Sabine, who of course is not going to take that as forgiveness, she goes over to Hera, who's laying there unconscious, and tells her that the protectors are going to have to answer for what they have done. So at the request of Commander Sato, the team meets in the briefing room to inform him of what just happened. And Sabine walks in very upset, and she goes, Fenral, the protector of CONCORD, that's who did this. That's who we're up against. Kanan responds, Rex, does that name sound familiar to you? And Rex says, it sure does. Fenral was a fighter pilot instructor for the Grand Army of the Republic. He also served, and then Kanan interrupts him immediately, says, at the Battle of Maikido, I know, I was there. And Sato says, that was a long time ago. And Kanan says, so I guess negotiating's been taken off the table? And Sabine, very upset still, says, yeah, you want to negotiate? Let's negotiate by destroying their ability to attack us. I tracked them from CONCORD Dawn's third moon. They must have a base there. And Sato says, if they scan our fleet approaching, their fighters will cut us to pieces. And Kanan says, then I guess we'll have to hit them before they take off. Sato responds, you think you can infiltrate their base? And Kanan says, I believe I can. And Sabine says, we can take out their fighters, all of them. Sato says, it's risky, but I approve. Kanan, who's trying to protect his team, chimes in and says, well, I don't. This is a solo mission and I'm taking it. I'm already one man down. I won't risk anyone else. Sabine, who's upset that she's not going to be able to participate against Mandalorian, says, Kanan, I know the Mandalorians. You need me on this mission. And then, of course, Ezra and Zeb, who don't like the idea either of Kanan going by himself, say, no way, we're a team. You can't go without us. Kanan says, all right, I'll take Chopper then. And then as soon as he says Chopper, Chopper's like, what? In this scene, you don't hear him grunt. You literally hear him say what? Like that couldn't have been a more audible word that Chopper's ever said on this show. And Kanan says, but that's all. And this is not open for further discussion. Come on, Chopper. And when he says that, that's when Chopper proceeds to grunt even more. He's just like, let the rest of the team go. I didn't agree to this. This is a suicide mission. So Kanan and Chopper take the Phantom, still to Chopper's reluctance, and head to the Protector's base. Kanan says, Chopper, load up the intel Sabine gathered. We can pinpoint where their base is. And Chopper begins to grunt again. And Kanan says, what do you mean, just ask her? And Sabine says, he means I'm standing right behind you. Better jam those scanners. And Kanan says, what are you doing here? And Sabine goes, you must be pretty distracted not to have noticed that I stowed away on the Phantom. So what are you really up to? And Kanan says, you heard Sato's orders. I'm going to destroy those fighters before they take off. And Sabine says, I know you better than that. Kanan responds, fine. I'm going to finish Hera's mission. We need to recruit the Mandalorians to join the rebellion. Sabine says, the Protectors almost killed Hera. What are you thinking? And Kanan says, I'm thinking we can still offer them a chance to change. Everyone deserves a second chance. And Sabine says, this Jedi philosophy stuff doesn't work for everyone. And Kanan responds, that's why we're at war. So pretty cool that we're finally getting, just to kind of cut this for a little bit before I continue, this is kind of the first true Mandalorian episode that we're getting in Rebels. And we start discovering a little bit more about Sabine here, and it's going to continue going forward. So this is the first of basically the introduction of an important character, Fenral, and the introduction of how the Mandalorians are gonna play a role in the Rebels seasons going forward.
Right.
So the team approaches and lands near the Protector's base, scouting the area for a ship count as Sabine plans to plant her explosives. And during that process, an Imperial shuttle arrives with an officer to meet Fenral with payment. Fenral informs the officer that the arrangement they have with the Protectors is working to their benefit as they have encountered a squadron of rebels. And the officer tells Fenral that if the rebels return, for him to be sure to contact them. So Sabine calls out Kanan about the current state of his plan, and Kanan makes Sabine a deal. She gives them a chance to recruit the Mandalorians, and if that doesn't work, she can blow up their fighters. Sabine, who of course at the word blow up or explosive, of course is going to agree.
Right.
But she says, I'm not just going to blow up their ships. Fen Rao has to pay for what he did to Hera. So Sabine is very much still on a revenge mission for Hera, because she's, Hera was put in significant harm's way in the first encounter.
Right.
So Kanan and Sabine infiltrate the base, with Kanan following Fen into his quarters, while Sabine begins planting explosives on all the ships that are there at the base. So Kanan's just standing at the doorway, and Fen's immediately aware of his presence. And Fen, as he's sitting there eating, says, "Pretty bold to sneak onto my base. I'm going to assume you're one of those rebels I dealt with earlier." And Kanan responds, "That's a pretty good guess, but not the entire truth." Fen says, "I don't recognize you, so before I gun you down, why don't you tell me what you want?" And Kanan says, "We never met, but I do know you. In fact, I came to thank you. In the Clone Wars, you fought in the third battle of Maikido, and I was there." Fen says, "You're a survivor. That explains how you got past my men." Kanan says, "My master, Deba Balaba, and I were pinned down, trapped by droids. You and your Skull Squadron flew into the Separatist fire over and over to cover us. You saved our lives." Fen says, "That was a long time ago. I was younger and more reckless then. And to be honest, I don't see what that has to do with you being here." And Kanan says, "You gave me a chance to live that day. Now I'd like to return the favor." So Kanan's obviously trying very heavily to recruit Fen here, because he knows the importance of the hyperspace route for the rebels, but he also realizes the importance of recruiting. The rebels at this point are still very much a small scale thing, very similar to what we're seeing in Andor as well. So anybody that they can get on their side particularly only stands to benefit the rebellion. So as that conversation's happening, we see the scene cuts to Sabine, where she's continuing to sneaking around planting explosives. But unfortunately, she is eventually caught, and she's held at gunpoint by the protectors that are outside patrolling. Sabine says, "How's it going, boys?" And one of the protectors says, "Where did you steal that armor from, bounty hunter?" And Sabine goes, "Bounty hunter? Not lately. I forged this armor with my family." And the protector responds, "Family? That's a bold claim. What's your house?" And Sabine says, "I'm Clan Ren, House Vizsla." The protector says, "House Vizsla? She's Deathwatch, traitor." Sabine responds, "My mother was, but I'm not. I came here to settle a score, and I invoked the code to seek justice through single combat." The protector responds, "No one has invoked the code since the Empire took over." And Sabine goes, "Well, who's in charge here? The Empire or Mandalore?" So Sabine, knowing the pride of the Mandalorians, is very much just directly challenging them on, who really controls you guys. Yourselves, or is the Empire in full control here? And we also, I believe this is the first time we do get mention of Sabine's clan and house, which is a very strong house that we've seen in the Clone Wars, first at the introduction of Pre-Vizsla or Paz-Vizsla. I forget which one was I believe it's Pre, who we see the first Mandalorian holding the Darksaber in Clone Wars. So after that conversation, the scene cuts back to Kanan, who's still talking to Fen Rao. And Fen says, "I already fought one losing war for the Jedi. I'm not fighting another." Kanan responds, "You can't possibly believe in the Empire." And Fen says, "I believe they have the strength to defeat you and the resources to back it up. Why would I fight the Empire when obviously destroying you is so much easier?" Kanan responds, "You must know the Empire isn't interested in sharing their power. In the end, everyone is their enemy. If we don't stand together, then we're all alone." Fen says, "Alone is who we are." And one of the protectors barges in and says, "Sir, we have an infiltrator." Fen says, "Don't worry, I have the Jedi under control." And the protector responds, "I don't know anything about this Jedi, but a Mandalorian trespasser has invoked the code. She claims she's House Vizsla." And Fen responds, "I assume she came here with you?" Kanan says, "Let me handle this." Fen responds, "I'm afraid it's out of your control now, Jedi." So Fen and Kanan walk outside, basically to confront Sabine. And as soon as they walk out, Kanan tells Sabine, "Sabine, I thought we had an agreement." And Sabine goes, "They started it." And Fen says, "Your house is an enemy to the protectors. Call out your opponent for combat to the death." And Sabine responds, "I thought you'd never ask. I call out you, Fen Rao. You're going to pay for what you did to Hera." So basically at that point, Sabine and Fen Rao go into this old Western style showdown where they're face to face, hands near their gun holsters, ready to pull out the trigger on a countdown, so to say, right?
Right.
And they're prepared to engage each other in combat, to the death. Whoever shoots first. Very similar, I guess. Make another reference to Book of Boba Fett when Cad Bane has a showdown with Covenant in the desert. So Kanan once again still is trying to convince Sabine and calm her down to de-escalate the situation. Kanan says, Sabine, this isn't what Hera wanted. She didn't want to create enemies and she wouldn't want you to die. Sabine says, I'm not planning on dying, Kanan. And Fen says, I'm afraid the only way you're getting out of here alive is if she kills me, and that is definitely not going to happen. Kanan says, what is it with you Mandalorians never knowing how to solve anything except through the end of a blaster? Sabine, you do this, you're no better than him. Sabine says, Kanan, you need to trust me. And Kanan says, Sabine, you make this choice, and win or lose, the Empire is going to be all over the system and the fleet. Sabine once again says, Kanan, you need to stop talking right now. So at that point, Sabine and Fen draw their weapons, with Sabine being just a tad bit quicker on the draw. And rather than shoot Fen Rao dead, she shoots the blasters out of Fen's hands. And as soon as she does that, she sets off her explosives so that her and Kanan can escape with no casualties. So they escape, however, the protectors are chasing them down still. So they take refuge in one of the tents, and they're pinned down by the protectors. And we have a brief conversation between Sabine and Kanan, where Sabine informs Kanan that they have to go on the offensive and get to Fen Rao since she did not have enough time to set explosives on his ship. We see Fen attempt to flee, but Kanan does manage to catch up to him. At that point, Fen, takes off on the ship, and Kanan's kind of taken for a ride on the outside of the ship. So Kanan, who we see hanging on for life as basically Fen's almost about to leave the planet, break the atmosphere, so to say, Kanan manages to make his way to the cockpit and knock out Fen as Sabine and Chopper arrive on the Phantom to pick up Kanan and Fen. So after that, we see Kanan take Fen prisoner for all intents and purposes. He gets on the Phantom, and later Fen Rao does eventually wake up from his unconsciousness state, and he finds himself with Kanan and Sabine aboard the Phantom. We see Fen receive a transmission from the Protectors as Kanan tells him to take the call, and Fen informs the Protectors not to continue their pursuit of him and to also not inform the Empire of the Rebels. He also orders the Protectors to grant the Rebels safe passage through CONCORD Dawn system. The Protectors kind of hesitate at first at taking these commands, but they do as he says because he's the leader.
Right.
So the team arrives back at the Phoenix Squadron with Fen Rao in hand as prisoner, and Kanan says, welcome to the rebellion. Fen says, right now we are only friends because we have to be. And Sabine goes, what does that mean? And Kanan says, well, the Empire doesn't make a habit of rescuing people. The last thing Rao wants is Imperial ships all over his territory, and that's exactly what he'd get if they found out he was our prisoner. Ezra walks in and says, Kanan, Sabine, Hera wants to see you. So Hera, who is now awake, although definitely still, severely injured, says, she tells Kanan, I hear we're taking prisoners now. And Kanan says, I like to think of him more as a reluctant recruit. Sabine says, it was better than the alternative. We're not at war with the Protectors. There was no need to take their lives if we didn't have to. Hera looks at Sabine and says, Sabine, you're sounding more like a Jedi than a Mandalorian. And Sabine responds, well, I guess I've just been raised right.
I really like that last line. Once again, going back to what we've been saying since day one, which is they are a de facto family through and through.
I don't know if I'm just seeing more shows nowadays. Mind you, this is more a cartoon. This Rebels is definitely way more of a kids cartoon. I hesitate to say it that way, but it is more so than Clone Wars is. But I mentioned that specifically because I love how every single ending of every episode, it takes me back to my childhood, to where like every show had a moral to the story. Not necessarily a happy ending, but a lesson to be learned. And I totally love that we get that in every single episode of Rebels. Right,
definitely. Well, that wraps up a pretty fun little episode. It was definitely, like you said, very Mandalore centric, and it really delved into some of just a little part of the background as far as the Mandalorians go. There's so much history there that just barely scratching the surface of it. Obviously, there was more in Clone Wars, but we're going to keep digging into some more of it, especially with Sabine on this team. So in future episodes. So any closing comments on the episode, Broly?
No, just to add on to what we've both said at this point, like what Pete said, this is the beginning of what we're going to be seeing from the Mandalorian role in Rebels. You Star Wars fanatics out there know that Moff Gideon shows up in the first season of The Mandalorian with the Darksaber. So I can tell you guys, there's definitely a connection that we're going to see from this series that leads to that scene. So there's a lot more Mandalorian stuff to come. I know, when we talk Mandalorians, that's like a number one hot topic that everybody's interested in Star Wars. So there's definitely more to come.
Absolutely. Definitely more to come. And that would be coming up not next week, because I wanted to also touch on something. Next week is Thanksgiving. So we will be taking the week off here at Good Morning Lothal, but we will sure be right back the first Friday of December, dropping a brand new episode. And in that episode, we'll be talking about Star Wars Rebels Season 2, Episode 14, and it's called Legends of the Lasat. So as you can tell, it's going to be a Zeb-centric episode, which I'm looking forward to.
Yes.
So if nothing else, then I want to remind everyone to please like, share, subscribe, and rate. Also, any comments, questions, concerns, please drop them anywhere that you can. And I want to thank everyone once again for listening. This has been Pete Salas along with
Rolando Zamora,
saying, may the Force be with you always. Goodbye from Lothal.